Oh, today we are talking about how to build a community in your local community and use that to grow your business. My guest today is Zachary Kushel. I'll tell you more to him in a second, so stay tuned.
Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we feature top entrepreneurs, business leaders, and thought leaders and ask them how they built key relationships to get where they are today. Now, let's get started with the show.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corcoran here. I am the host of this show. You know, if you listen, and hopefully you have before, every week I get to talk to interesting and smart CEOs, founders, and entrepreneurs of all kinds of companies. We've had Netflix and Kinko's, Grubhub, Redfin, Gusto, YPO, EO, Activation Blizzard, lots of great episodes in the archive, so go check those out. And of course, this episode brought to you by Rise 25 and Podcast Copilot, our companies where we help B2B businesses to get clients, referrals, and strategic partnerships with done-for-you podcasts and content marketing. And you can learn all about us by going to rise25.com or emailing us at support@rise25.com. And my guest here today actually first was introduced to me by Anthony Vidergauz, former CEO and founder of California Closets, now an advisor primarily for franchise businesses and a friend who lives locally, another local connection. And he was a guest on my show, so check out that episode. And Zach, you know, how do I describe you? He's the founder and managing partner of Marin Sonoma Impact Ventures, aka MSIV, but he has an amazing, diverse professional background. I think kind of like me, couldn't just sit still in one industry. So similar to me, has worked in the White House, Wall Street. I haven't worked in Wall Street. Silicon Valley, I've worked in Silicon Valley, and now has come to the North San Francisco Bay, which is where I live. And he established, beginning in April 2020, the Marin Sonoma Impact Ventures, which is a fund investing in this region of the country. But we're going to unpack how he did it, raised money for it, built a community. I attended their event about a month ago. It was just an amazing show of a community of people that are gathering together. So I think there's a lot of lessons that you can bring to your business as well. He also worked at SmithRx, Glassdoor, Cisco, and also worked in the White House. He and I have a shared background that we both were interns in the White House. He also worked on Senator John McCain's 2008 presidential campaign and has a master's in public policy from Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. And Zach, so cool to have you here today. And first, let's start with, I'd love to know how people were as a kid. So you were not you're not a lemonade stand kind of kid. You weren't doing that sort of thing, even though your father was a bit entrepreneurial.
Yeah, thanks, Sean, for having me on. I'm excited to spend time with you and talk more about everything we're up to. But yeah, I mean, look, I'm one of three boys, so a classic middle child that probably didn't get as much attention as I wanted as a kid, and spent a lot of time, doing what kids do. But no, I wasn't that like 12-year-old kid who started a toothbrush sales business, and that's where my entrepreneurial start came from. In high school, I was a scorekeeper for the rec department at local games. That was the job that I had. And but my dad was entrepreneurial. So he was a business school professor for 42 years, first at NYU and then at Fordham University in New York City. And I watched him build a pretty massive, consulting, education, training business on the side of his professorship, and got to see that from a very young age and understand what it's like to have a business and grow a business. And that was certainly my first foray into what it meant to have a business and be an entrepreneur was through my dad, who I, idolize a strong word, but certainly a mentor to me and someone who I, look up to this very day. That was the beginning for me. And part of that journey was, ended up in me, going to Wall Street, because that's kind of where he taught. So that was kind of my first career out of college, but kind of caught the political bug, similar to you.
Yeah, so you ended up at the White House. It looks like you worked in the Office of Public Liaison in an internship?
Yeah, so in 2005, I went to Cornell University undergraduate, and they have an incredible program called Cornell in Washington, D.C., where you spend a semester living in D.C., and everyone has to get an internship. And I said, well, shoot, if I'm going to get an internship, I need to go get one at the White House. The only problem was, I wasn't the son or daughter of a White House donor, of a presidential donor, which is, usually where those jobs come from. My family, pretty apolitical. We talked about, sports at the dinner table rather than, political discussions. But my aunt was a fundraiser and had done this event and knew someone that worked at the White House through that event. So she said, what if I forward your resume along. And I said, oh, that's probably not going to lead to anything. And sure enough, they hired me. So I somehow got my resume pulled out of the pile there. And as a 20-year-old, was a White House intern. And, it was a pretty amazing place to start one's career.
It is for sure. I think back now, and some of the people that I worked with, became CEOs of publicly traded companies, or now are in Congress, or they are a judge somewhere. What were a few of the memories from that experience? What did you take away from it? What were the lessons?
I think my biggest lesson was that our government is run by human beings, which might sound kind of obvious, but when you're young and you just think that there are these overlords above, and the government is this monolithic thing, and no, I mean, having the experience where you're able to read about something in the newspaper and then interact with some of the people you're reading about, getting to know them as people with families. The running joke we had was like, that person goes to the men's room too, right? Like you run into them in the bathroom. Like you just never think about these things as someone who doesn't have access to famous people or people running the government. So the humanization of it was huge for me. I left there fairly inspired that the folks working in our government were all genuine people, all wanting to improve the country and do good in the world. And I still feel that way, that the bulk of people working in and around politics, even if the outcomes aren't exactly what we necessarily want as a whole, we're getting them from a bunch of people who are very, firm in their beliefs and genuine about what they're doing. So I think the problems are more related to our systems, I think, than the people in them. But that's probably a much longer discussion.
For sure. We could do an hour, many hours in that one. Now, every White House is slightly different, but I recall from my experience there in the Office of Public Liaison, you mentioned sports. There was a guy whose job was to be the liaison to all the different sports leagues. And every year, the different sports leagues, the championships teams would come to the White House, and that was that person's job. And I remember going to this guy's office in the Eisenhower Executive Office building, and he had like ESPN on, he had like a basketball hoop on the wall. I mean, this is, for a very staid place, that was completely out of the norm. Do you recall coming across someone like that? Was there someone
not only that, but it was incredible. So I was in DC, and I was at the time dating a girl who was from New England, and that was 2005. So the Boston Red Sox and the New England Patriots were the champions. So over the course of my 5-month internship, I was able to get her and others, to come to these events at the White House. So I was feeling like I was a pretty, important person.
That's pretty pimp.
There.
That's pretty pimp.
Funny.
For sure.
I have this incredible picture with Bill Belichick, and the former coach of the New England Patriots, and everyone knows Bill Belichick. He's quite famous for always being in his sweatshirt and a hoodie. So I have this incredible picture, and it was my Facebook picture for a few years back when I was younger, where I have my arm and I'm shaking Bill Belichick's hand, and he's wearing a suit and tie.
So
and everyone's looking at me saying, "How on earth did you get a picture of Bill Belichick wearing a suit and tie?" So that it was super cool, super neat. But it actually almost all comes full circle to where I am today, because one of the women that worked at the White House Office of Public Liaison, a woman named Katie Hayes, is actually the person that got me my job at Cisco, which is what brought me to California and ultimately, to Marin County to launching MSIV. So if it wasn't for the sports events that happened and that I went to as a White House intern at 20, MSIV wouldn't have been born, which is, funny how
so funny how that. Yeah, that's for sure. Those little things that you can connect them all along the way. So you end up you're working on Wall Street, and you end up going after that and working on John McCain's presidential campaign. What was that like, working on the presidential campaign? It looks like you did it for about a year and a half, and I've never worked on a presidential campaign, although I worked in politics, so I know how grueling they can be.
It was still probably the most incredible experience of my life, those 18 months on the campaign. I left my job on Wall Street in July of 2007. And at the time, I was working at Citigroup, and that stock was trading at, let's call it $55 a share. And I joined John McCain's presidential campaign as a full-time volunteer, because the campaign had no money and they couldn't hire me. And everyone thought that, he had no chance of winning. So I was one of 11 staffers in the state of New Hampshire that worked on, Senator McCain's campaign in New Hampshire. And, I think, was a small piece of engineering, kind of one of the the most incredible comebacks in political history when he ultimately won that New Hampshire primary and became the nominee for president. And it was, it was incredible. So like 6 months later, right, Senator McCain's the nominee for president, and Citi's trading at $1 a share. So everybody thought I'd made this, trade of the century. If only I knew. And because we obviously had the big crisis of '08, and I left the street just before that happened. But yeah, I mean, an absolutely incredible experience. I started that campaign as a driver, literally driving the senator around, and ended it as the deputy director of North Carolina, a key swing state in that election. I mean, only on a presidential campaign can you go from being a driver to being, a critical staffer in the span of 18 months. And it was definitely a meritocracy in terms of, showing up, working your butt off, but also, being loyal to the candidate and being loyal to that cause, because as a campaign progresses and as a campaign goes from a primary campaign to a general election campaign, all of a sudden, all these people that didn't support you and didn't want to work with you, all of a sudden want to work with you. So I think having folks on board that, were there from the beginning and who folks know are loyal is a big piece in running that campaign. But obviously, Senator McCain was defeated in that election in 2008. So instead of getting to go back to the White House, my consolation prize was the Harvard Kennedy School. So I got to go.
Good backup plan.
Yeah, it was great. I mean, my boss on the campaign was an alum and wrote me a letter of recommendation, and was lucky enough to be admitted. So spent 2 years there, and two of the most formative years of my life. And, again, wouldn't have traded any of it. Wouldn't have traded any experiences.
I went to New Hampshire in 2000, mostly because I wanted to experience it. I went in January of 2000, which, of course, January is right around the time that the New Hampshire primary occurs. And it's just, if you work in politics, which I did for many years, it's kind of the Super Bowl. It's just where all the excitement happens. And so I just wanted to experience it. And, I imagine today the work that you're doing now draws on some of the work that you did back then, organizing. Really, it's like retail politics 101. It's like organizing groups of people and getting them to the polls.
No, that's a great analogy. I used the word, when we were completing our fundraise, I said, we're going to be barnstorming throughout the North Bay. And I had a few people say, what the heck's barnstorming? And I didn't realize that was a political term. But I mean, look, the way I raised this fund, and we can talk more about it, but I was kind of going one backyard at a time, talking to groups of 3 people or 4 people or 10 people, whatever audience folks would give me, and talk to them about, what we want to do for the North Bay community. And there's so many parallels to a political campaign for sure. Instead of asking for votes, we were asking for capital, but the nuts and bolts of it are the same. And that's, it's why I think being in politics, working as a political organizer as a young person, it's some of the most incredible training you could possibly have. And it absolutely translates into startups, into business. Convincing people who are hiring that it translates is difficult. But actually, getting that job is the hardest part. Once you're in it, the training is absolutely, second to none. And it certainly a ton of parallels between what we did there and what we're doing here.
And while you were at the Kennedy School, you actually ended up having a startup, which was called iPonte. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so on the campaign, I met a gentleman named Mario Diaz, and we co-founded a company after the campaign called iPonte, and this was a user-generated video opinion platform. So the whole idea was, this is a place you would go, the morning after there was a big game the night before, and turn on your online video and talk and debate with strangers about the game, kind of your own version of Pardon the Interruption, if folks know what that show is on ESPN. So, that was kind of our vision. And, I was, knew I was going to go back to school, and Mario was our CEO, and he came out of news media. And we spent 2 years, building this website and building this platform. The problem was neither of us were technologists. And it might sound obvious, 15 years later, but obvious in hindsight, at the time, it didn't seem crazy to us that we were 2 people who knew nothing about technology building a technology company. And we had the vision, we had the ability to, Mario knew a lot of people who were very well known in the sports world. So we had some celebs kind of cutting videos for us and promoting us. But we couldn't fully build a platform. And we partnered with someone who was able to get 80% of the way there. We never completed that last 20%. And we kind of ran out of our personal funds that we were using to fund the project. It was really interesting. It was my introduction to VC in Sand Hill Road. So we actually, through some introductions, came out to the Bay Area, went around town, pitched for capital. again, I think in hindsight, I had no idea what I was doing. Didn't even know what VC was.
Did you
But
have any?
it opened my
A lot of
eyes.
times when you hear people, with their first experience going and raising money, they have either like embarrassing or uncomfortable experiences. Do you have anything like that where
I didn't know enough to be embarrassed, if that makes sense. Like, again, looking back, if I was watching the video of it, I'm sure I'd be embarrassed. But we were two folks very genuine about what we were doing who had never done it before and didn't come from the worlds where people have done it before, right? That wasn't our world. So I would say it was eye-opening, but more eye-opening in hindsight. But it was also very important for me because it showed me that I could do it, if that makes sense, right? I was able to see a vision, turning something that was just purely an idea, purely a vision, turning that into a reality, and how damn hard that is. So, my background was essentially in that case, right, trying to build a pre-seed startup company, raise some capital, get to your first major launch, and we kind of died before that even launched. So I saw how damn hard that was. I worked at Glassdoor, which was a Series G company trying to get public, and I saw how hard that was. At SmithRx, I was a Series A company, learning or trying to get to become a Series B company. I saw how hard that was. So I came to the startup world not as a serial founder and entrepreneur, but as someone who had worked in the trenches at all these different stages of startups and their different life cycles, and just understanding with great humility how hard it is at every stage, how unsexy it is, and how difficult it is to get there, which I think really clues in, when I meet with founders, kind of how I approach what they're doing. And do they have the same naivete that I had as a 24-year-old? Or are they smarter, wiser beyond their years than I was? Because, we probably weren't investable in hindsight, right? And we also quit, right? So, my co-founder, the CEO, had a young family and, didn't have unlimited personal runway. And I had a great backup plan, which was getting this master's from the Kennedy School, and opening the world to me after that. So, the pain wasn't big enough for us to stick it through. So we didn't. And
that's one of those X factors that really can make a difference. Is this when you look at a founder, are they someone who's just going to keep on going no matter what when everything's against them? It's oftentimes what you want. Tell me about
is this their life's work, right?
Right.
And I think in hindsight, it probably wasn't our life's work. It was a great idea. We were excited about it, but we weren't willing to sacrifice everything to make it work. So we didn't.
So you end up after Kennedy School, you end up going to Cisco. And what did you do at Cisco? Now, of course, that's a very large company. You work for the biggest of all, the federal government, and now you're working at a huge technology company.
Yeah, Cisco's an amazing place. So I worked on the global government affairs team, and the analogy I would use is I kind of almost ran an internal State Department at Cisco. I was in charge of dignitary visits for the company. So any given week, you come to Silicon Valley, and there are, there's 30 elected officials from around the world, right? 10, 3 members of U.S. Congress out here visiting companies, raising money, right? You have the finance minister of Turkey. There's the crown prince of Belgium leading a 200-person Belgium delegation, and they go and make the rounds, right? They go to Facebook, Google, Cisco, HP, Oracle. So I was kind of in charge of hosting those gatherings for Cisco and kind of being that core liaison between the executive staff and their teams and the delegations themselves. Even, I became best friends with the Secret Service folks who were, they do all the protection stuff there, who were based in the Bay Area. So it's kind of like you're kind of on the circuit a little bit. So, but the best part about that job was, I was able to be a fly on the wall. Our CEO and chairman, John Chambers, was a mentor to me. And I was able to be a fly on the wall when he was hosting heads of state, at Cisco.
What did you learn from him when you saw him hosting heads of state coming to visit?
I learned how it's done at that level, right? I learned what it means to, have a conversation with someone at a strategic level, not at a transactional level, but doing so in a way that could help advance your goals as an organization and ultimately help advance transactions. And I think as a young person, you kind of, you'd sit in these meetings and be like, why are they spending 20 minutes talking about, right? What does that have to do with Cisco's business? What does that have to do with bringing a factory to their province? Isn't that the goal of this delegation, right? But, you kind of, again, you sit there and you learn that everything in life and everything in business is about trust and trust building. And I just got a first class education in that, being able to watch, one of the legends of Silicon Valley do it. It was a very, formative experience for me, and one that really opened my eyes to Silicon Valley, which was great.
Yeah. And then Glassdoor, of course, different type of company, not a public company. You said it was Series G, I believe.
Yes.
And doing something really kind of new and different at the time when they came up, where they were coming up.
Yeah, I mean, it's I was out here and I realized I was going to stay out here. I met a California girl and realized I was probably spending the rest of my life in California.
That New Jersey boys, they're going to stay.
There you go,
yeah.
right? So, and quickly realized that, I wanted to kind of get closer to the business of the region, right? I mean, you look at a company like Cisco, right? Tens of thousands of employees, and there's 3 people doing government affairs in San Jose, right? So this weird intersection where government meets business is very much a niche role. And it wasn't something that I was, it was enjoyable, but I wasn't excited to go down the kind of corporate lobbyist path, which is kind of the path if you want to remain in a government affairs function over the long term. And I wanted to get closer to startups because I had all these friends out here who were working at young companies, that were kind of building the future. And I was working at a very big, very mature company, which was doing great stuff, but it's very hard as a young, ambitious person to advance in a giant organization, right? Which everybody knows. You have to kind of go smaller to advance more quickly in your career. So I wanted to move from a large company doing government affairs to a small company doing a business role. And it was really, really hard to do. Everyone said it's impossible. You have to do it 2 moves at a time. You can stay in your function and go from a big to small company. Or, you can move functions, but it has to get the similar size company or in the same company, but you can't do it in one fell swoop. And I ended up taking a meeting with a guy named Jim Buttimer, who ran business development at Glassdoor. And he grew up in DC, so he understood how the political world and the business world intersected, and looked at me and said, yeah, you could do this. I can teach you how to do this job. So he gave me a shot, which I'm forever grateful for. I ended up coming into, probably the most successful startup to come out of Marin County the last 15 years. And 9 months after I got there, he called me up and said, hey, I got 2 pieces of news. He said, number 1, I'm retiring. And he said, number 2, you're getting my job.
Okay.
So, so I ended up running the business development team there for about 2.5 years, and, got a first class education in working at a mature startup company and what that was like. And, to this day, best friends in the world, came out of Glassdoor. MSIV wouldn't be here if it wasn't for that Glassdoor experience, because it's, again, what brought myself and my wife to the North Bay.
And where did the idea of starting a venture fund focused on this region, which you had been in for 2-3 years?
Yeah.
At that point, what inspired you to create a venture fund and build a community around it dedicated to the region?
Well, when I got to Glassdoor, which was this incredible company that was employing 500 people in Marin, right?
Yeah.
I was trying to figure out, why weren't there 30 more of these up here? I mean, the North Bay is probably the most beautiful part of the Bay Area. Marin and Sonoma County, 2 of the most affluent counties in the entire country. You have some of the highest levels of intellectual capital of anywhere on planet Earth. But if you look at kind of the modern incarnation of Silicon Valley geographically, it's stretching from San Jose in the south to the Presidio of San Francisco in the north. Last decade went east to Oakland, Emeryville, Berkeley. If you look at that 101 corridor from Sausalito up to Healdsburg, it's kind of been that left behind corridor when it comes to startups and job creation. So given my background in politics and in government affairs, and where really my background was where government, technology, communities met, that was my background. When I got here, I kind of had on that hat I brought from Cisco, my economic development hat, because I was hosting these delegations from all over the world. And I was saying, well, what the heck's going on in the North Bay? This community had everything going for it, but if you look at the metrics, right, it's a community that's lagging in terms of net new job creation, right? All the jobs that came to the Bay Area in the 2010 decade didn't come to the North Bay; they came everywhere but. So I was trying to figure out why that was. So I ended up, meeting with, people that have been around this community a heck of a lot longer than I have, right? Natives, people have been here for 10, 20, 30 years, leaders in the business community. So I did that. And, I was asking them, like, why aren't there more Glassdoors here? And all the answers I got, John, I found wildly unfulfilling, right? Like there was all this conventional wisdom that had kind of cropped up that you couldn't build a company up here and that the community didn't want companies, that was grounded in like some speck of reality, right? But increasingly was not relevant to the age we were in. Because what happened was that in the 2010 decade, San Francisco became the hub for startups in place of Palo Alto, in place of the peninsula region of the Bay Area. So what that meant was that for the first time ever, the heart of Silicon Valley was commutable from the North Bay. And it was never going to be commutable from the North Bay if the heart of Silicon Valley was Palo Alto, right? That's an hour and a half drive. And some people did it, but it's not a very
I did it for 1 year. It's not fun.
And it wasn't fun. So you get it, right? So I was moving here. I had a young family at the time. And I would meet all these people in the community and they would say, I tell everyone I work at Glassdoor, this unicorn startup company in Marin, and they would go to me, "Oh my God, you're living the dream. I wish I could work at a high growth startup in Marin County." And I had that conversation 300 times. And I'm not saying 300 as hyperbole. I'm saying literally 300 times I had that same conversation. So I said, this is odd. You have all these people here, increasingly that have this incredible skill set. They love this community. And they moved here because they didn't want to be in Silicon Valley or San Francisco. They intentionally wanted to be here. And you had all this capital in the community, and yet all this intellectual capital in the community, yet all of it's being invested in San Francisco, New York, or London startups instead of startups in our own backyard. So I said, that's crazy. Like, why are we not investing locally? So I got this idea and I tried to figure out who was leading the community forward on this issue, who was trying to usher in the next era of economic development in the region, who was saying, hey, if you're a local entrepreneur and you want to build the next great North Bay company, we care and we want to help you, right? I was looking for these people and quite frankly, like to my chagrin, they didn't exist. The community was very static. It was, we've been doing it this way for a very long time. And for those who don't know the North Bay, right, this is a local economy almost entirely reliant on wine, tourism, and agribusiness. And if there's anything, the last 7 years have shown us in the North Bay, after 6 years of mega drought, 3 incredibly devastating fires, and a global pandemic, it's that a local economy entirely reliant on those 3 industries is one that is not insulated from the ravages of climate change, and one that is not healthy, and one that is not going to meet the needs and interests of the next generation of people. So I figured out that there was a giant community gap, and I figured out that nobody was leading on the issue. And I also figured out there was a giant business opportunity because of all the incredible people that were going to be building companies up here. So when you see a community needing a business opportunity, that should scream to you social enterprise. And that's kind of exactly what inspired me. So I said, well, if no one's building this and the community needs it, well, shoot, that's going to be my life's work. And
you actually
4.5 years in.
And you went around and you actually talked to others who'd done this in other parts of the country. So Vermont, Montana, Tulsa, Oklahoma, Boulder, Colorado, Alabama, all these different places. What did you learn from those conversations?
Oh my God, so much. So the first thing I did when I got this idea to launch MSIV was, Brad Feld, who folks know from Foundry Group, Techstars, part of the Boulder, Colorado kind of tech scene in the 1990s, wrote a book called Startup Communities, right? And it's kind of a handbook on how do you build a local startup community, a local entrepreneurial ecosystem. So, that kind of became my Bible. And I was doing this research and I kind of discovered that there was all these efforts all around the country doing these things. So I reached out to Fresh Tracks Capital in Vermont, which was on fund like 4 or 5. They've been doing this for 20 years. And of course, when you reach out to people cold, you're always surprised at who responds. So this gentleman, Kern Cross, the nicest guy ever, got on a call with me. He said, let me tell you how I did this in Vermont. And, Will Price in Montana has a fund called Next Frontier Capital, investing in Montana businesses and is building an entrepreneurial ecosystem there. So he got on the phone with me and talked about that. I talked to Michael Bash in Tulsa, Oklahoma at Atento Capital, who was telling me all about what they're doing to drive, Tulsa's economic growth via startup companies. So I talked to these folks, and what I learned was that there was no one way to do this. Like those 3 efforts I mentioned, they were all born in different ways and they were all funded in different ways, right? Some have a single LP, some have foundation funding, some have private funding. The role of the government's different in all these different places. So what I quickly realized is that I had to figure out how to get this thing going, for the North Bay. I can't just take the Vermont or Montana playbook and adapt it here. I can use their lessons with the Bible of startup communities in hand and figure out what's going to work here. So that's kind of what I did. And I figured out how to go our own way in a way that made sense for this community.
And then, so that's kind of like your Bible. And then you go about, I guess, shortly after that, I got to raise some money here. And so what was that experience like?
That was really hard. I joke that, it would have been helpful if I had, run a venture capital firm before, or maybe worked at a venture capital fund.
A lot of times that's the case, right? It's a VC who's been a VC at some other fund.
Correct.
They start a new fund based on their track record.
That's right. But there's no one way to get anywhere. So, maybe I went at it a harder way, but that was the path. What's interesting is I was all set on launching MSIV. I knew exactly what we needed to go do. And the goal was to go bring Fund 1 to market in April of 2020.
Good timing. Perfect.
And then March of 2020 hit.
Yeah.
So I'm sitting there in April of 2020 and I don't know what to do because the world stopped and I'm helping my wife out at her law firm. So I needed to stay busy.
How the checks cleared, or were you like, you had people that were ready to write a check and then,
no,
I've heard a lot of stories like that where people are like,
I wasn't that far along. Like I was just talking to people conceptually. I hadn't even gone to it wasn't like I had commits that didn't come through. I was about to start hitting the pavement in April. Right.
Okay.
And I said to myself, I can't go raise money now. Like, what the heck am I going to go do? So, and then I realized, well, shoot, like I can do everything I'm trying to do without raising money except for two things. One, I can't pay myself. And two, I can't write checks into companies. Putting those two things aside, everything I was talking about in terms of building the local entrepreneurial community, building an ecosystem here, leaning in, excuse me, and helping local founders in any way I possibly can, I didn't need money to go do that. And luckily, again, my wife has a great job. She runs a law firm here in Marin County. And, so I had some personal runway where I was able to say, all right, I don't need to take a salary immediately to put food on the table. I'm going to go do that. So I said, let's just go build without raising the money. Let's just go help people. So I pulled 5 founders together for a meeting. And I said, hey, if I built a founder community here, would that be interesting to you? Would that be helpful to you? Or would that be a waste of time? And all 5 said, no, this would be a great idea. Like, go build it. So then I pulled together a meeting a few months later with 14 local founders. And now that North Bay Founder Network, 4 years in, has 185 founder CEOs of young startup companies that have joined this community in some way. So the community piece of this took off almost immediately. And then once the COVID reopening happened and I can get people in person, I was able to restart the fundraise. And, shocking that building a community-based initiative gets easier when you can actually convene the community. Shocking that you have someone who you've never met before, right? To write you a $100,000 check. Shocking that it's easier to do over a cup of coffee or in someone's backyard than on a second Zoom meeting. So,
I want to know what other ways the COVID changed your approach, because living in this community, I can tell you that there was a lot of change. A lot of people who like from Europe who moved back home because they didn't want to be so far away from their family, and then a lot of people who decided to move from urban areas into this community. So there's a lot of changes, and a lot of people all of a sudden could work remotely for different companies. So how did that affect your original, theory about what this company would be?
It changed it drastically and it accelerated it drastically. So, while the pandemic was certainly not a good thing, for what we were trying to do, it made what we were trying to do that much more relevant. Because for the first time, everyone was forced to stay home. So they were looking more locally. And a lot of these people who were titans of global business, who were traveling the world, were stuck here and realized, oh my God, I have no tie to my own community. What the heck's going on in my own community? And we were able to be that bridge for that. The other thing that happened is that historically, the North Bay was viewed as a very difficult place to scale a startup business. So if you wanted to go, go from 0 to 500 employees in 18 months, an hour north of San Francisco, people would say that's probably not the best idea to go do that. What happened with COVID is that, and the advent of remote work is that, no one's going to be scaling from 0 to 500 anymore without hiring people remotely, without having satellite offices. All the traditional barriers to building a startup here kind of decreased. They kind of went away. So the way I'd frame it is like a North Bay founder pre-COVID, we had to convince them to build in the North Bay and not convince them to not build in San Francisco. Post-COVID, for a North Bay founder, they're not building in San Francisco. They're going to build here or they're going to build nowhere. They're going to build remote. So now we're competing with remote. And I actually think that's a much easier, winnable thing to compete with than building in San Francisco. So it certainly accelerated our thesis. The future of jobs, in our belief, is hyper local. So my thesis is that the 90-minute commute is going away, but the office is not going away. So if you could give someone a global job based nowhere, sitting in their house all day, or an in-person job 10 minutes from their house with people in their community that they like, our thesis is that 95% of people, would take the in-person job, because it's not the being in person that people hate. It's the, I'm losing 2.5 hours of my day to commuting, and I want to put that into my family, into my physical well-being. So we are enabling a future that is hyper local from a job creation standpoint. And people are really resonating with that message and with that vision.
So you do end up raising, I believe it was about $6 million in your first fund. Who did you finally get to buy into that vision and write a check for the fund?
So it took us 24 months. We raised $6.6 million from 62 unique investors. 92% of those investors live in Marin and Sonoma County. So we basically passed the hat around the community and ended up with a super hyper local raise. It was all individuals and families, so we didn't raise a single dollar of institutional capital. I pitched 662 people, I counted,
wow.
to get to 62 yeses. So that was a 9.4% pull-through rate, which is the reality of a fundraising funnel. So, and it was really hard. And everyone says, oh, I bet you the hardest part was, being resilient, because 9 out of 10 people said no to you. And the reality is that 9 out of 10 people didn't say no to me. More often than not, 9 out of 10 people just never got back to me, right? So when you're fundraising from individuals can just go on with their life. They don't need to engage or respond or whatever. And the other thing I learned is that nobody's in the business of investing in a fund one. It's right? And 90% of investors are like, why would I do that? So you have to find the right type of people who say, you know what, I pride myself on being early. I pride myself on being a leader, not a follower with my capital. And again, the reality is most people are followers when it comes to investing. So that certainly has me feeling good about prospective future fundraisers, because now we have this track record to point to. But while I was in it, it certainly was a very difficult fundraise. And again, I kept moving the goalpost back to make sure I could claim victory and get this fund going, which we ultimately did.
And I mentioned earlier that I attended your most recent event, which was something like 300 people there, 350, 400, whatever it was.
330.
330, amazing community of people. And having lived in this community for 20 years, it just really was amazing seeing all those people come together. But before we get to that, I think we kind of have like a formula here, because you said, you started with having a lot of conversations, asking people, what they wanted in this community, really kind of understanding what's beneath it, why there hasn't been some kind of local organization or fund to support a startup community. Then you got together 5 people, 5 founders. You got them together. You asked them, is this what you would want? They said yes. You came back again a couple of months later, 14 people with another event, asked them what they wanted. And then you had a bigger event. And the event supported, I believe, the fund, and you ended up raising a fund. Is there anything else I'm missing that you'd put into that? For those who are listening to this thinking, oh, I could do this in my community. What else would you add?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you nailed it. One of my mentors, a gentleman by the name of Paul Soley, who built a very successful business here in Marin County. I was listening to him give a talk recently, and he kept talking about how he was building his business over the course of 20 years. He had a thing on his wall that just said TTT. Things take time. Things take time. And there are no shortcuts in life, and there are no shortcuts in business. And as a very impatient 35-year-old, when I started MSIV, I could understand that intellectually, but I don't think I fully internalized that. And I think now, again, 4.5 years into this journey, things take time. Like, if someone's not ready to invest in fund one,
come back.
You're not gonna convince them, right? So it's like, do your thing, right? And show, don't tell. but you need time to show. So I think the formula is right. Like, do your market research, do your user research, talk to people what they want, build what they want, and then give yourself the personal runway and be kind to yourself and give yourself the time. Don't say, oh my God, I got to find a $10 million investor in 3 months or I'm a failure. Like, if that's the metric you're setting for yourself, you will be a failure because that's just a crazy goalpost. So you have to be generous with yourself. And if I have one big regret maybe over the past 4.5 years of this journey, I probably haven't been generous enough to myself. I think everyone's been very generous to me, and I've probably been really hard on myself because, as an entrepreneur, you're never where you want to be.
You're never satisfied.
No, you're never satisfied.
Yeah. You're always pushing and
that's a healthy thing, but you have to celebrate your wins more. And and I have no idea how we've gotten here, John. Like, what I mean by that is, like, if you would have said to me 4 years ago, this is where we're going to be, I would have said impossible. Right? I have no idea how I'm going to do that. The only way I've gotten from A to B is just every day you show up to work and you put one foot in front of the other and you try to get one win every day. And all of a sudden you wake up, it's been 4 years, and one win a day adds up to thousands of wins, and you're much closer to where you want to be.
And let's talk about the event that you did. So you had 330 people there before. I've done an event of about that size before, but I cheated because I did it in conjunction with another event, a conference that had about 7,000 or 8,000 people. It's a lot easier to get 300 people together when they're attending a conference and looking for something to do. You brought people together on a random Wednesday or Thursday, and you had the founders of Serena and Lily speak, and Equator Coffee, and the guy who created a solar company that eventually became Tesla Energy. Some really amazing people that you had there. So just reflect a little bit on that event and how it ended up coming together.
Yeah, it's our third annual event. It was our biggest one. Our theme was Build It Here. So, it's a conference, but it's much more than a conference. So after we pulled off the event, I was talking to Elizabeth Murphy, our VP of Community, my partner in crime here at MSIV. And, she was basically telling me, she said to me, how many conferences have you been to in your life where, you sent an email to the conference organizer the day after saying thank you? She asked me this question. And I looked at her, I said, I think 0. It made me feel like a bad person. I said, usually they should be sending me a note, right? Thanking me for buying a ticket and coming to the, it's like, whatever. And she said, how many emails have you gotten in the last 24 hours? And I said, I think like 40.
Wow.
And she said, what does that mean? I said, I don't know, but it means something, right? So it's not a conference. We call it a conference, but it sounds hokey, John, but it's neighbors gathering. And it goes back to the hyper local thing. We couldn't have done that in San Francisco. You couldn't have done that in New York. You couldn't have done that in London. It wouldn't have the same feel. But when you do it in a hyper localized community, and the North Bay, as you know, is a collection of 10,000 person small towns. Even our biggest city, Santa Rosa, with 180,000 people, feels like a 10,000 person small town. When that's the vibe you get, and you're accentuating into that, and the people you put on stage are locals. So we don't import speakers from San Francisco who are famous people to come in and speak. Every single person we put up on stage, and we put over 30 people up on stage, they're all locals. They all live in this community. They're all neighbors. So the whole idea of the conference is like, come meet your neighbors and see how we can help each other. And that resonates with people, because when folks show up and they feel like that's not just talk, that's the actual vibe of what you're building, they want to be a part of that in a way you don't want to be a part of a conference, because conferences are, can be stodgy and impersonal and transactional.
Right.
And what we did is it's a community gathering.
Yeah, that was great. You did such a great job on it, and I've been to a lot of conferences before. I'm mindful of the clock. We're almost out of time, so I want to wrap up with my gratitude question. So I'm a big fan of gratitude, especially expressing gratitude to those who helped you along the way. You've mentioned a bunch of names so far, but who would you want to shout out and thank for helping you in your journey?
Oh my God! I mean, where do I start? I would say specifically with MSIV. Look, the one person with an idea, this thing has only happened because I had multiple people go out of their way to be successful. So I would say our kind of founding team of advisors, Steve Fox, the CFO at Everyman Jack, was the first person to put his name next to mine on this thing and lend his credibility to MSIV. Craig Nelson, Beth Stoluto, Gabe Turner, Jeff Morgan, Greg Castle, Mike Lewis, and this the OG group of advisors that kind of pushed me to keep going when this wasn't easy. We wouldn't be here because of them. Obviously, Elizabeth, who runs this incredible community, we wouldn't be here without her, and literally hundreds of people. I mean, this is, I talk about MSIV as a local movement, and I really mean that, but literally hundreds of people in this community have gone out of their way to make this thing successful. I'm lucky enough to be, the one in charge here, but I couldn't have done this by myself. I'm one person, and I've only been in the community for 8 years. So because this has resonated with folks as much as it resonates with me, the mission, the vision, they've leaned in. So those are just a few people that I have to call out who have made this possible. And obviously, my wife, the ultimate original investor, as she calls herself.
Yeah.
We wouldn't be here without her.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And so we'll just wrap there. And for anyone who's listening to this from Asheville, North Carolina, or Jacksonville, Florida, and wants to replicate this model in their local community, where would you point them to, and how would they look you up and learn more about you?
Yeah, so get that book, Startup Communities. That's what got me started. And then talk to other communities that you think look like yours, demographics wise, size wise. Don't think you can take the Silicon Valley model and bring it to Asheville. Look for a place like Asheville, who's ahead of Asheville from that standpoint, and model that. And I love talking to folks around the country where I can be helpful. So my contact information is on our website, msivfund.com. And go build and go improve your communities. I think every single community out there should have a local startup community and should have a local fund. I think we need more buckets of place-based impact capital here in this country. And I would encourage everyone to feel inspired to go do that.
And I know you've announced a few investments. You want to put a plug in for any of those?
Yeah, I mean, today we just announced our 9th investment, Sageful AI, out of Sausalito, California. Michael Pepe and Drew Batshaw, very excited for them to be building the future of corporate learning. We have an incredible portfolio of now 10 startup companies, 9 of which we've announced. And, we have incredible companies. So shout out to all of them. Go check them out on our website and go see how you can partner with them and help them. They're amazing.
Zach, thanks so much.
John, thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.